The wind rolled low across the open prairie that evening, carrying with it the scent of dust, dry grass, and the kind of loneliness only a man who has lived too long with silence can truly understand. And that man was Cole Maddox, the cowboy folks in Willow Creek whispered about, not because he was dangerous, but because he carried a quiet sadness in his eyes, the kind that comes from losing too much too early. He had spent most of his life tending cattle, fixing fences and pretending the empty cabin he returned to each night didn't echo as loudly as his thoughts. But everything changed the moment he spotted something unusual far across, the fading horizon while riding. His old chestnut horse, Ranger, who seemed to sense his rider's sudden tension as Cole narrowed his eyes, wondering why on God's earth a figure, small, thin, unmoving, was bound to the split-rail fence at the far edge of Dawson Valley, a place no decent soul had business being at sunset. And as he rode closer, his heartbeat quickened, because what he thought might have been a trick of the light turned out to be a girl, an 18-year-old with long, tangled hair, dirt-streaked cheeks, torn sleeves, and rope binding her trembling, framed to the wood as if she were nothing, more than livestock abandoned. In the dying light, Cole swung off his horse before it even fully stopped, his boots kicking up dust as he moved toward her with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with his rugged build, and the girl flinched as though she had been trained by pain to expect the worst from anyone who approached, her eyes downcast, refusing to meet his gaze. But he softened his voice immediately, saying, "Easy now, I ain't here to hurt you." And though she did not answer, the shiver running through her thin shoulders said enough about the terror she'd been living with. He carefully reached for the rope, noticing how tightly it was cinched, biting into her skin, and the more he worked to free her, the more he wondered what kind of man, what kind of monster, would leave his own daughter tied to a fence in the middle of nowhere. And when she finally whispered in a voice so soft it nearly broke him, "My father," he was drunk, said he'd come back when he felt like it. Cole felt anger burn in his chest. But he pushed it down because right now the girl needed comfort more than rage, so he gently lifted her once she was free, steadying her when her knees buckled. And he realized she was so light, so fragile. She felt like a memory he might break if he held her too tightly. She tried to stand on her own, insisting weakly, "I'm fine, I can walk." But her legs trembled beneath her, and Cole shook his head, replying, "Ain't no shame needin' help," before guiding her to Ranger and lifting her carefully onto the saddle, climbing up behind her so she wouldn't fall as they headed toward his ranch, the sky darkening to a velvet blue sprinkled with early stars. She barely spoke on the ride home, only giving him her name, Lila, and even that sounded like it hurt to say, as though she had forgotten what it felt like to be treated like a human being rather than a burden. When they reached his cabin, the warm glow from the lantern inside spilled onto the porch, and Cole helped her down, leading her inside with the quiet assurance of a man who had long ago learned how to move softly around pain. And once she was seated at his wooden table, he set a cup of warm water before her, watching her hands tremble as she lifted it to her lips. And he realized she must have been left at that fence for hours, maybe longer. After a while, she began to speak, haltingly at first, revealing a life marked by fear and neglect, a father who drank himself senseless, a home that felt more like a battlefield. And Cole listened in absolute silence, not judging, not interrupting, just allowing her to release the weight she'd been carrying for far too long. And when tears finally slipped down her cheeks, she turned her face away in embarrassment. But Cole simply handed her a clean cloth, saying softly, "Ain't nothing weak about crying, Lila," and somehow those words loosened something inside her, something tight and wounded. And she whispered, "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." And Cole leaned back in his chair, sighing heavily before answering, "Because someone should have helped you long before now." And that was the moment, quiet and small, yet powerful, when something shifted between them, not romantic, not yet, but a fragile trust beginning to take root where only fear had lived before. As the night deepened, Cole prepared a spare bed for her in the room he rarely entered anymore, a room that once belonged to his younger sister before she passed. And he paused for a moment at the doorway, feeling an ache of memory but also a strange relief, as though offering the room to Lila somehow honored the sister he could not save. When Lila finally lay down, exhausted and half asleep, Cole quietly stepped outside onto the porch, staring out at the empty prairie while thinking about the father who had left her tied like an animal, and he swore to himself that if that man ever came looking for her with harm in his heart, he'd have to go through Cole Maddox first. The night was cold, lonely, and filled with questions, but Cole felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of purpose, a reason to wake up the next morning, a reason to keep his cabin warm and the world just a little safer for someone who had never known safety before. And as the lantern glowed through the cabin window behind him, he made a silent promise to himself and to the girl sleeping under his roof. He would protect her, help her heal, and give her a chance at a life her father never let her dream of. And for the first time in years, Cole Maddox did not feel completely alone. And dear viewers, if you want to know what happens next, if her past returns, if danger comes knocking, and how this unlikely bond turns into something powerful and life-changing, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because Chapter 2 will break your heart and heal it all in one breath. Chapter 3, single continuous paragraph, no breaks. The morning sun crept slowly over the horizon, casting soft gold across the quiet prairie as Cole Maddox stepped out of the barn, wiping the sweat from his brow after feeding the horses. But something in the stillness tugged at him, a strange tension in the air that felt heavier than the heat rising from the ground, and when he turned toward the cabin, he found Lila already awake, standing barefoot on the porch in her plain cotton dress, her hair falling loosely around her shoulders as she stared out toward the distant valley with an expression he couldn't quite read. And the moment their eyes met, Cole sensed something had changed overnight, something she had been holding back finally ready to surface. So he approached slowly, asking, "You sleep all right?" Even though her sleepless eyes said otherwise, and she hesitated before whispering, "Cole, there's something I didn't tell you," and the tremble in her voice made his heart tighten, prompting him to gesture for her to sit beside him on the porch steps where the morning breeze carried the scent of sage and dust. She folded her hands tightly in her lap, her knuckles pale as she confessed that the night her drunk father tied her to the fence wasn't just another episode of cruelty, but the result of a much darker truth. Her father had gambled away nearly everything they owned, and the men he owed money to had given him a choice: pay up or hand over Lila. And instead of protecting her, he chose the latter, leaving her tied to the fence as an offering for dangerous men who were supposed to collect her before sunrise. But thanks to Cole's unexpected arrival, she had been saved by a razor-thin stroke of fate. Cole felt the blood drain from his face as the weight of her confession settled in his chest like a stone, and his jaw clenched with anger, not at her, but at the world that had failed her so completely. Yet he forced himself to remain calm, because she needed his level head more than his rage right now, and he gently placed a hand on her shoulder, saying, "Lila, listen to me. Nobody's taking you from here. Not now. Not ever." And she turned to him with wide, fearful eyes, as though the idea of someone choosing to protect her was still foreign and fragile. But before he could say more, they both heard the sharp, distant rumble of engines. 2 trucks kicking up dust clouds as they approached from the valley road, moving far too fast to be friendly callers. And Cole's hand immediately went to the revolver at his side as he rose to his feet, scanning the horizon with a hard stare. Lila's breath hitched as she whispered, "It's them. They came for me." And without hesitation, Cole gripped her hand, pulling her gently but firmly back inside the cabin, closing the door quietly as he told her to stay. Low, stay behind the table, and not move unless he said so. And though her fear was palpable, she nodded, trusting him completely. Outside, the trucks roared to a stop near the fence line, and heavy boots hit the ground as 3 rough-looking men emerged, calling out in coarse voices for Lila's father, cursing the fact that she was no longer where she was supposed to be. And then one of them spotted Cole standing firm on his porch, hat low, one hand resting casually yet unmistakably on his holstered gun, the embodiment of calm defiance. "Morning," Cole said evenly, though his voice carried the cold steel of warning. And when the men demanded to know where the girl had gone, claiming she belonged to them as payment. Cole's expression hardened as he replied, "You boys made one hell of a mistake thinking a human being is a debt." And before they could draw their weapons, Cole's voice dropped to a dangerous low, "Turn around and leave while you still can." But the man laughed, misjudging his quiet nature as weakness, not realizing that the loneliness he carried had carved him into something far stronger than they could ever comprehend. The standoff stretched like a taut rope between them, and the moment one of the men reached for his gun, Cole moved faster, swift, controlled, precise, firing a warning shot that kicked up dust right at the man's feet, stopping all three in their tracks as pure shock flashed across their faces. And Cole said in a voice that vibrated with controlled fury, "Next one won't miss." And something in his tone, the promise, the absolute certainty, finally broke their arrogance, forcing them to retreat with curses and threats shouted from the truck windows as they sped off. But Cole didn't relax until the dust trails disappeared completely. When he finally stepped back into the cabin, Lila rushed toward him, her eyes bright with tears and terror, asking if he was hurt, and he shook his head, reassuring her softly, "They ain't gonna touch you, not as long as I'm breathing." And something in her, something wounded, hopeful, desperate, crumbled as she threw her arms around him, the embrace tight, trembling, and filled with gratitude she didn't have words for. Cole held her just as tightly, realizing in that moment that he wasn't protecting her out of duty anymore, but out of something deeper, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. And as she looked up at him with tear-filled eyes, he gently brushed a strand of hair from her face, saying, "You deserve better than the life you had. You deserve safety and a chance to dream again." And the way she leaned into his touch made his heart ache with a tenderness he didn't know he still possessed. Over the next days, Cole reinforced the ranch, made sure every path and entry was secure, and taught Lila simple things, how to ride, how to cook, how to laugh again. And as she slowly regained her sense of self, the bond between them grew stronger, built not from desperation but from healing and trust. And though the threat of those men lingered somewhere beyond the horizon, Cole knew one thing with absolute certainty: they would never take her, never break her again, because he had found something worth protecting, something worth living for. Maybe even something worth loving. But that part of the story, how a lonely cowboy and a broken girl healed each other, belongs to the next chapter. And if you want to experience the full emotional journey, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because the story is only just beginning, and you won't want to miss what fate has planned for Cole and Lila. The days that followed the confrontation were strangely quiet, the sort of quiet that feels borrowed, like borrowed time, borrowed peace, borrowed breaths, because Cole Maddox knew men like the ones who came for Lila never gave up so easily, yet he tried to let her live without fear, encouraging her to spend mornings helping in the barn, afternoons tending the small garden his sister once loved, and evenings sitting on the porch watching the sky turn orange and purple as the sun dipped behind the hills. And during those times, Cole noticed small things about her, like how she always hesitated before taking food for herself as if afraid someone would snatch it away, or how she startled at loud noises, or how she struggled to believe she deserved kindness. And though these details broke him inside, he never showed it, choosing instead to teach her the calm ways of ranch life, how to saddle a horse, how to guide a calf, how to breathe when memories tried to drown her. And slowly, like soft rain coaxing green from dry ground, she began to change, her shoulders lifting, her laughter returning in small, delicate pieces. But just when Cole began to believe she might finally feel safe, a letter arrived at the post office, addressed to him with handwriting he didn't recognize. And the moment he split the envelope open, his jaw clenched, because inside was a single sheet of paper bearing only 6 chilling words: "We know she's with you, soon." And though the letter carried no name, he knew exactly who had sent it. He rode home faster than he ever had, the weight of the message pounding in his chest. And when he reached the cabin, Lila stepped outside with a hopeful smile that vanished the moment she saw his face, her own expression tightening with worry as she asked, "Cole, what happened?" And he didn't want to scare her, Didn't want to reopen wounds that were barely beginning to heal. But he also couldn't lie, so in a steady voice he told her everything, watching her legs weaken until she sank onto the porch step, whispering, "I can't keep ruining your life. I should leave." And Cole stepped forward, his voice firm but gentle as he said, "You ain't ruining nothing. You belong here now." But she shook her head, tears falling as she insisted that staying would only bring danger to him, danger he didn't deserve, and he knelt in front of her, lifting her chin with a tenderness she'd never known, saying, "I've lived half a life in silence. Lila, half a life without purpose. You gave me something worth fighting for. I ain't letting you walk away." And before she could argue further, the distant rumble of engines cut through the air, deeper and heavier than before, and Cole's blood ran cold as he realized it. Wasn't just 2 trucks this time, it sounded like 4 or 5, all heading straight toward the ranch. Lila's breath hitched in terror, but Cole rose swiftly, determination hardening his features as he grabbed his rifle from beside the door and said, "Stay behind me. Don't move unless I tell you." And she nodded through her trembling, clutching the wooden porch column as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Dust clouds rose on the horizon like storm waves, and soon the convoy of trucks came into view, stopping at the fence line with a hiss of brakes and the thud of doors slamming open. And from them emerged not 3 men, but nearly a dozen, hard-eyed, heavy-built, armed, and angry, led by a tall brute with a scar running down his left cheek, a man whose presence alone could curdle blood, and he stepped forward with a mocking grin, calling out, "You've got something of ours, Cowboy." And Cole stepped off the porch with calm defiance, replying, "She ain't yours. She never was." And for a long moment the yard fell silent, filled only by the wind rustling the tall grass, until the scarred man laughed, low and cold, saying, "You really think you can stand against all of us?" And Cole's hand tightened around the rifle grip, his voice steady as he answered, "I've stood alone my whole life. This time I ain't alone," and as if summoned by fate, Ranger, the loyal horse who sensed danger before any human, stomped and snorted loudly behind him while Lila stepped to the doorway, fear still in her eyes, but something new rising there, too, something that looked like courage. And the men noticed her, leering, shouting things that made Cole's vision darken with fury. But before tempers snapped into gunfire, the unexpected happened. The sheriff's posse appeared from the west ridge, rifles raised, having been alerted by a rancher who saw the convoy speeding toward Cole's land, and the scarred man cursed, realizing he was outnumbered now. But even as the lawmen approached, he locked eyes with Cole and growled, "This ain't over," before signaling his men to retreat, engines roaring as they sped off in a cloud of dust, leaving behind tension thick enough to choke on. When the sheriff reached Cole, he warned that these men were part of a trafficking ring they'd been hunting for months, dangerous enough that Lila might need witness protection. But at the suggestion of taking her away, Cole's heart seized, and before he could speak, Lila stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes, saying, "I'm not leaving Cole. I'm done running my whole life." And the sheriff, seeing the conviction in her voice, nodded slowly, agreeing to station deputies near the ranch and keep watch. When they left, Cole finally exhaled, the adrenaline fading enough for him to turn to Lila, who looked like she might collapse from the weight of everything, and without hesitation he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as she wept against his chest, whispering, "Why won't they just let me live?" And Cole pressed his forehead gently to hers, promising in a voice full of fire and tenderness, "Because they ain't used to losing, but they just did. And as long as I'm standing, they'll never take you again." And in that moment, something shifted between them, something deep, quiet, unspoken yet undeniable, as if their lives had braided together, without either of them noticing. And as Cole held her in the fading sunlight, one truth settled in both their hearts. This was no longer just survival. This was the beginning of something that might one day be called love. And dear viewers, if you want to continue this emotional journey, if you want to see how Cole and Lila fight for freedom, healing, and the future they never thought they could have, then make sure you subscribe to the channel, because the next chapter will shake your soul and touch your heart in a way you won't forget.